Hi, welcome back to Jessica's Journeys, and we're reading 90 Minutes in Heaven by Don Piper and Cecil Murphy. We are on chapter 2, and it has a scripture before every chapter. It says, "He was afraid and said, 'How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven.'" Genesis 28:17. Now the chapter begins. "When I died, I didn't flow through a long dark tunnel. I had no sense of fading away or coming back. I felt my body being transported into the light. I heard no voices calling me or anything else. Simultaneously with my last recollection of seeing the bridge and the rain and the light envelop me with a brilliance beyond earthly comprehension or description. Only that, in that last moment of awareness, I was standing in heaven." So in a blink of an eye, he was in heaven. Joy pulsated through me as I looked around, and at that moment I became aware of a large crowd of people, and they stood in front of a brilliant, ornate gate. I had no idea how far away they were. Such things as distance didn't matter. As the crowd rushed toward me, I didn't see Jesus, but I did see people I had known. As they surged around me, I knew instantly that all of them had died during my lifetime. Their presence seemed absolutely natural. They rushed toward me, and every person was smiling and shouting and praising God. Although no one said, intuitively, I knew they were my celestial welcoming committee. It was as if they had gathered just outside heaven's gate waiting for me. The first person I recognized was Joe Colworth, my grandfather. He looked exactly as I remembered him, with a shock of white hair and what I called a big banana nose. He stopped momentarily and stood in front of me. I grinned at his face. I may have called his name, but I'm not sure. "Donnie," that's what my grandfather called me. His eyes lit up, and he held out his arms, and he took the last steps towards me. He embraced me, holding me tightly. He was once again the robust, strong grandfather I had remembered as a child. I had been with him when he suffered a heart attack at home, and I had ridden with him in the ambulance. I had been standing just outside the emergency room when the doctor walked out and faced me and shook his head and said softly, "We did everything we could." My grandfather released me, and as I stared into his face, an ecstatic bliss overwhelmed me. I didn't think about his heart attack or his death because I couldn't get past the joy of our reunion. How either of us reached heaven seemed irrelevant. I have no idea why my grandfather was the first person I saw. Perhaps it was something to do with me being there when he died. He wasn't one of the great spiritual guides in my life, although he certainly influenced me positively in that way. After being hugged by my grandfather, I don't remember who was the second or third. The crowd surrounded me. Some hugged me and a few kissed my cheeks, while others pumped my hand. Never have I felt more loved. One person in that greeting committee was Mike Wood, my childhood friend. Mike was special because he invited me to Sunday school. He was influential in me becoming a Christian. Mike was the most devoted young Christian I had ever knew. He was also a popular kid who had lettered 4 years in football, basketball, and track and field. An amazing feat. He had become a hero to me because he had lived a Christian lifestyle he often talked about. After high school, Mike received a full scholarship to Louisiana State University. When he was 19, Mike was killed in a car wreck. It broke my heart. I heard about his death, and it took me a long time to get over. His death was the biggest shock and pain I had experienced up to that time in my life. When I attended his funeral, I wondered if I would ever stop crying. I couldn't understand why God would take such a dedicated disciple. Through the years since then, I had never been able to forget the pain or the loss. Not that I thought of him at that time, but when I did, sadness came over. Now I saw Mike in heaven as he slipped his arm around my shoulder. My pain and grief vanished. Never had I seen Mike smile so brightly. I still didn't know why, but the joyfulness of the place wiped away any questions. Everything felt blissful and perfect. More and more people reached around me and called me by name. I felt overwhelmed by the people and the number who had come to welcome me in heaven. There were so many, and I had never imagined anyone being as happy as they all were. Their faces radiated a serenity, and I had never seen on earth. All were full of life and expressed radiant joy. Time had no meaning. However, for clarity, I'll relate this experience in terms that refer to time. I saw my grandfather, I heard his voice, I felt his embrace, and he told me how excited he was that I had come to join them. I saw Barry Wilson, who was my classmate in high school, who later drowned in a lake. Barry hugged me, and his smile radiated a happiness that I didn't know was possible. He and everyone who followed praised God and told me how excited they were to see me and welcome me to heaven, to the fellowship they enjoyed. Just then, I spotted two teachers who had loved me and often talked about Jesus Christ as I walked among them. I became aware of the wide variety of ages, young and old, and every age in between. Many of them hadn't known each other on earth, but each had influenced my life in some way. Even though they hadn't met on earth, they seemed to have known each other now. As I try to explain this, my words seem weak. They seemed weak and hardly adequate because I have to use earthly terms to refer to the unimaginable joy, excitement, warmth, and total happiness. Everyone continually embraced me, touched me, spoke to me, laughed, and praised God. This seemed to go on for a long time, but I didn't tire of it. My father is one of 11 children. Some of his brothers and sisters had as many as 13 children. When I was a kid, our family reunions were so huge we rented an entire city park in Monticello, Arkansas. We Pipers were an affectionate bunch with lots of hugging and kissing, and whenever we came together. None of those earthly family reunions, however, prepared me for the sublime gathering of saints I experienced at the gates of heaven. Those who gathered at Monticello were some of the same people waiting for me at the gates of heaven. Heaven was so many things, but without a doubt, it was the greatest family reunion of all. Everything I experienced was like a first-class buffet for the senses. I had never felt such powerful embraces or feasted my eyes on such beauty. heaven's lights and textured, deftly define earthly eyes and explanation. Warm, radiant light engulfed me as I look around. I could hardly grasp the vivid, dazzling colors. Every hue and tone surpassed anything I had ever seen. With all the heightened awareness of my senses, I felt as if I'd never seen, heard, or felt anything so real before. I don't recall that I tasted anything, yet I knew that if I had, it too would have been glorious and anything more than I had ever eaten or drank on earth. The best way I can explain it is to say that I felt as if I were in another dimension. Never ever in my happiest moments had I ever felt fully alive. I stood speechless in front of the crowds of loved ones, still trying to take in everything over and over. I heard how overjoyed they were to see me and how excited they were to have me among them. I'm not sure they actually said the words or not, but I knew they had been waiting and expecting me. Yet I knew that in heaven there was no sense of time passing. I gazed at their faces again, and I realized that all the contribution to my becoming a Christian or encouraged me in the growth to be a believer, each one had affected me positively. Each had spiritually impacted me in some way that helped me become a better disciple. I knew, again, one of those things without being aware of how absorbed the information, that because of their influences, I was able to be present with them in heaven. I didn't talk about what happened, what they had done for me. We didn't talk about what they had done for me, or our conversation centered on joy or being there, or how happy they were to see me. Still overwhelmed, I didn't know how happy to respond to their welcoming words. I'm happy to be I'm happy to be with you, I said with those words. I couldn't express the utter joy of being surrounded or embraced by those people I loved. I wasn't conscious of anything I'd left behind, felt no regrets about leaving family or possessions. It was as if God had removed anything negative and worrisome from my conscience. I could only rejoice in being with those people, those wonderful people. They looked exactly as I once had knew them, although they were more radiant, joyful than they had ever been on earth. My great-grandmother, Hattie Mae, was an American Indian, a Native American. As a child, I saw her after she developed osteoporosis, her head and shoulders bent forward, giving her a humped appearance. I especially remember extremely wrinkled face. The other thing that stands out in my memory is that she had false teeth, which she didn't wear very often. Yet, when she smiled at me in heaven, her teeth sparkled, and I knew they were her own. And when she smiled, the most beautiful smile, it was the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. Then I noticed something else. She wasn't slumped over. She stood up straight. She was upright. The wrinkles had been erased from her face. I had no idea what age she was, and I didn't even think about that. As I stared at her beaming face, I sensed that age had no meaning in heaven. Age expresses time passing, and there was no time there. All of the people I encountered here were the same age had they been the time I had seen them, except that all the ravages of life on earth had vanished. Even though some of the features may not have been considered attractive on earth, in heaven every feature was perfect, beautiful, and wonderful to gaze at. Even now and then, sorry, my clothes are coming off. Even now and then, years later, I can sometimes close my eyes and see a perfect countenance and smiles and surprise me with the most human warmth and friendliness I had ever witnessed. Just being with them was a holy moment and remained a treasured hope. Then I stood in heaven, and they were still in front of me, and it came crashing down. They embraced me. With no matter what direction I had looked, I saw someone that I loved and who had loved me. They surrounded me, moving around so that everyone had a chance to welcome me in heaven. I felt love, more love than ever before in my whole life. They didn't say they loved me. I don't remember any words being spoken or what words were being spoken. When they gazed at me, I knew what the Bible means by perfect love. It emitted from every person who surrounded me. I stared at them as I did, I felt it absorb their love for me. At some point, I looked around at the sight, and it overwhelmed me. Everything was brilliantly intense. Coming out from the gate, a short distance ahead, was a brilliance, and it was brighter than the light that had surrounded us, utterly luminous. As soon as I stopped gazing at the people's faces, I realized that everything around me glowed dazzling intensity. Then, trying to describe the scene, words were totally inadequate, because human words can't express the feeling and awe and the wonder of what they beheld. Everything I saw glowed with intense brightness, but I can describe it as we began to move toward the light. No one said it was time to do so, yet we all started moving at the same time. As I stared ahead, everything seemed to grow taller, like a giant hill, yet they kept going upward and it never stopped. And I had expected to see some darkness behind the gate, but as far as I could see, there was absolutely nothing but intense radiant light. By contrast, the most powerful light I had encountered when I met my friends. The loved ones paled in comparison to the radiance of the iridescence in front of me of my increased. It was really, really bright. It was as if I took intensified and glowing luminously. I didn't know how much more dazzling it could get, as it would be like cracking a door in a room of brightness in the noonday sun. The door swung open and the ray of sun burst forth, and were momentarily blinded. I wasn't blinded. I was amazed by the luster, and the intensity continually increased. Strange as it seemed, brilliant as everything was, each time I stepped forward, the splendor increased. The further I walked, the brighter the light. The light engulfed me. I had the sense that I was being ushered into the presence of God. Although our eyes Our earthly eyes must gradually adjust to light or darkness. My heavenly eyes saw with absolute ease. In heaven, each of our senses are immeasurably heightened to take it all in. And what a sensory celebration! A holy awe came over me as I stepped forward and had no idea what lay ahead, but I sensed with each step I took, I would see more and more. It would grow more and more wondrous. Then I heard the music. And that's where we stop. Chapter 3 is Heavenly Music. I hope you've enjoyed reading this. The first chapter was great, and we figured out what happened and how he died. And then the second one is where he meets his family and friends and people that have taught him and about Jesus. If anyone has any questions about this, just leave me a message and I'll answer it for you. Till then, I guess I will talk to you later, and I will see you the next time. You have a wonderful, wonderful day, and be blessed. God bless you. Bye-bye.